people from all over the world came from a central location. So are there any people groups anywhere in the world that are not related to Noah? No. And I think this is why we got to come back to this. So, a few brief things about why racism is wrong from the Bible, why we know it is, why the Bible has always been attacked racism, but evolutionary thought has actually promoted it. So, quick thing is we have just this important passage from Revelation chapter 21, verses 23 through 24, which says at the very end, so Revelation 20 is a big battle, God takes over. Revelation 21, new heavens, new earth happen, Jerusalem, this giant city drops, God is present, there's no more need for sun, right? Then it says, the city had no need of sun or moon to shine it, for the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb. So who's the light now? Yes. And by nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So what still exists in the time of God's new creation? Nations. And it's interesting. It's the word, I'm going to see if I can do this with my finger. I didn't bring my pen. It's the Greek word ethnos. What does that sound like? Ethnicity. Yeah. So it's not it's not nations as in geopolitical nations, though there are kings. It's ethnic groups. So this idea of different ethnic groups, different languages really matters. And it's going to matter for all of eternity. That kind of blows your mind a little bit, like our different faces and colors. So then I want to do some checking. This came from a little book, actually, I was reading with my kids. It's really helpful for me. I was like, oh, this makes sense. It seems like books for kids are great for adults, right? And so I was trying to answer the question, where does skin color come from? Because if we're all descendants of Noah, why are we all different colors? And there's this great little thing called melanin, which is described as being the umbrellas of our skin. It's really great. So you have this fun thing called the sun. The sun is beautiful. It keeps us warm. It goes down at night and we start to get cold. But what's the bad thing sun does? Skin damage, right? So UV light comes through and it can go into the lower layers of your skin, damage your skin so that it breaks apart, and even damage your DNA so it replicates wrong, you get cancer. Really bad. So the amazing creator that God is created a natural umbrella or a natural sunscreen called melanin. It basically does a really good job of blocking the UV light just like sunscreen does. It's able to go into the upper layers of the skin, as we'll see in a second, and it reflects the UV light away from the lower parts which need to be protected. Make sense? Okay. So in a person's body, you have the skin cell, which has, the upper epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis below. You got little hair follicles going out here. And within this, you have these little things called melanocytes. Melanocytes is this cool protein that produces melanin, located in the lowest levels of the epidermis, so right on the top part. Technical words, basically, you got this cool little part of your body, top layer of your skin, that produces the umbrellas. It's an umbrella factory. Kid lesson, make sense, right? All right. So what happens is the sun comes down and it hits the melanocytes, which produce melanin, right? And when it hits that, the melanocytes start to produce melanin. Now, it says here, they transfer the granules, the melanin granules, to epidermal cells where they block the damaging UV light. So on the left here, you see this darkly pigmented skin has a bunch of this melanin floating around in it, right? Versus the lightly pigmented skin, you only got the little one here and the little one there. Make sense? Dark skin, you have lots of what?
Melanin.
Light skin has little melanin. We'll come back to this in a second, but it goes up to the top, blocks out the light. So then, why do some people have darker skin? What? More sunlight. But here's the thing, is it's not just because they have more melanocytes that create more melanin, but their body retains the melanin after their cells no longer divide. Now, for some of you who come from very Northern European backgrounds, say you go out in the sun, get a little bit burnt, go in the sun again and again and again all summer, okay? And you get a nice tan. What happens to that tan about a month after summer? It fades away. Yeah, so your melanin doesn't stay in your system, right? Does that make sense? It dissolves because your body says, I don't need it anymore. But people who have certain family backgrounds, like this, like you can see on the left here, I'm trying to draw, African, they have tons of melanin that stays in their skin cells the whole time. Because see, UV light is only damaging towards actually dividing cells. The top layers of your skin, it just sits there, it's protected, it's not divided anymore. The DNA is not damaged. The lower levels are what need to be protected. As certain families have gone on, they have acquired the darker skin over many, many years of it. So the people with lighter skin, they break down their melanosomes very quickly, like we just said. And it doesn't take very long for this to happen. Does anyone remember their genetics classes? Like, you remember those things? There are these little AVs and stuff. So you can see, okay, we got a mom and a dad, and they have babies. Now, if you have a mom with AA with two littles and a dad with two littles, you get someone who has very white skin, right? Or if you get a dad and a mom who have both the capital ones, they have all babies who have capitals. This is something he was talking about. So in the beginning, you had Adam and Eve, and you had tons of options. And then there's this thing called a bottleneck. Do you know what's the point of a bottleneck? It gets narrow, right? And in fact, as he was trying to point out, it actually gets narrower and narrower as generations go on. The people scattered all over the world, and you only married the people who were nearby. You only had kids with the people nearby, and the genetic diversity got smaller and smaller. And in a few generations, you can go from people who have lighter skin to, or you have people who have browner skin to those with lighter skin, those with darker skin. All from the same source, though. Important. Very quickly, skin changes. Now, there's a wrong view of skin color out there. We all come from Adam and Eve, from Noah, all equally made in the image of God, all different colors, right? But evolutionary thinking over the years led to racism very quickly and continued to propagate this. So our good friend, Mr. Charles Darwin, is famous for what book? Origin of Species. Does anyone know its full title? No, that's the second book. Good guess, though. I got it for you here. The Origin of Species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. The preservation of favored races. Now, he means that in the truest term of different race, because people thought that if you had a different skin color, you were from a different race of human, different kind of human. This actually becomes pretty clear in his book, The Descent of Man, right? Where in it he theorized that man, having evolved from apes, had continued evolving as various races, with some races more developed than others. Darwin classified his own white race as more advanced than those lower organisms, such as pygmies, and he called different people groups savage, low, and degraded. That part doesn't really get repeated too much when we talk about Darwinism, does it? So let's start. So that's Charles Darwin. Let's give a very specific example that's come up recently. This is Ota Benga. Ota Benga was an African man from Congo in 1904. He's actually a father of 2 children. At age of 22, had already had 2 children, but was a very short African man. And this becomes news because last month in July, the Bronx Zoo in New York decided to apologize for putting an African man on display in their monkey house in 1904. How many years ago was that? Math? People? Yeah. So why do you think they decided to apologize this year? Politics. Like they're like, oh, we've realized we need to be sorry for how we perpetuated systemic racism over the years. But no, this wasn't systemic racism. This was evolution, which is actually the truest form of racism. So, little timeline. Kind of leading up to Ota Benga's humiliation, 1833, the British Empire abolished slavery through politics and through saying that Africans were just as human as Europeans, and that this evil practice needed to stop. 1859, Darwin writes The Origin of Species, and then 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the USA, and 1871, Darwin wrote The Descent of Man. You almost see this. Many of the early abolitionists were Christians. They weren't atheists who were fighting for the rights of men and women of different ethnicities to be treated equally. Abolitionists come along, we're like, got this great idea. Okay, how are we going to say that people are different? Darwin came up very clearly. There is a more advanced European race. So what happens is this man from, I think he's from South Carolina, Samuel Phillips Verner. He was a slave trader during slavery eras and actually became kind of known as an African explorer. And so he went to Africa, into the Congo, and tricked Ota and a number of other men to come back with him to the United States. Basically captured them. He actually makes this incredible point where he's like, he was shocked that African men, monsters, he called them, were able to sit at the table with white folks. So he takes them back to the St. Louis Fair with a bunch of other pygmies and puts them up and has them dance around, right? It's just kind of like a cultural display. This was the thought at the time. Then he takes them to the Bronx Zoo in New York, where the director of the Bronx Zoo, William Hornday, came up with this great idea. He's like, hey, this guy would go so well in our monkey exhibit to educate the people about human evolution. You get this? So he saw no difference between the beasts and this little black man. And so for the first time in any American zoo, a human being was put in a monkey cage, literally, for a week until, you know who got upset and called the mayor and got him out? Pastors. It was New York pastors who were like, this isn't humane, you need to stop this. But he was given friends. He was given friends to keep him company. A parrot and an orangutan. to keep them company in the cage. Now, it gets even better. Okay, the sign on, you know how you go to zoos and there's little signs that tell you what you're looking at? The sign said, "This is a genuine African pygmy belonging to the subrace commonly miscalled the dwarfs." The subrace. The co-founder of the Bronx Zoo, I was talking about Henry Osborn, was regarded as a leading evolutionist of his day. This is actually in the early days where evolutionary theory is kicking off. It's only been like Darwin, the ideas existed before Darwin, but his just really mainstreamed them. So it's slowly coming into the Americas as well. This is pretty new there. Ellen.
Was this man willingly in the cage, or was he put there against?
The story goes that at first he was kind of unsure what was happening, and he thought that it was just going to be like the dance at the fair, just like he was kind of brought to the United States. But he started fighting very quickly. So by the end of the first day, he was fighting them, and they were forcing him in for one whole week until the mayor ordered him released. So maybe the first day he went willingly because he wasn't really sure what was going on, but very quickly he began fighting against them. The Henry Osborn, and one of the founders of the zoo and the directors at the time, wrote, "In no other human stock which has come to this country is there displayed a unanimity of heart, mind, and action, which is now displayed by the descendants of blue-eyed, fair-haired people of Northern Europe. If I were asked what were the greatest danger which threatened the American Republic today, I would certainly reply, the gradual dying out among our people of those whose hereditary traits, through which the principles of our religious, political, and social foundations were laid down, and their insidious replacement by traits of less noble character." Sounds a little bit racist. This is the leading evolutionist and one of the directors at this zoo. And let's be clear, even today, I just Googled for the faces of evolution, okay? Whose face is darker in these pictures? Is it the most evolved man? It's the black faces are more monkey-like, right? Even today, there's still this large focus that, oh, well, we are descended of apes, so if you look more like an ape, then you're less along the evolutionary train. And don't get me wrong, most mainstream scientists will never actually say that today, but if you try and push them about why that's not the case, they'll have some arguments, but they're fairly weak in what they say. This is the difference the Bible story tells us, right? This is great. Every nation on earth comes from whose family? Noah's. There is no reason to say any people group are less advanced or less in the image of God. All people need the gospel, and all people, by the power and grace of God, can hear the gospel and believe it. There is only one race, the human race. Just FYI, I found this story because it was on creation.com. And Answers in Genesis has a number of things about this. Want to read more about this? Go to creation.com or answersingenesis.org.